This happened to me, and maybe it's happening to you too. Have you ever noticed how you can spend 30, 40, maybe 60 minutes on your phone without even realizing how much time has passed? But when you try to spend 10 minutes in prayer, your mind starts searching for an escape. You open the Bible determined to seek God. You read a few verses. Then a thought comes to mind. I'll just check something on my phone. You pick up the device. One notification leads to another. One video leads to the next. Before you know it, 20 minutes have disappeared. But perhaps the most worrying thing happens when you go back to the Bible. Now it seems even harder to read. His mind is restless. You read a sentence, but your thoughts are already elsewhere. And then that silent guilt begins. Why can't I seek God like I used to? Is my faith growing cold? Is there something wrong with me? Perhaps you've already promised this several times. Tomorrow, I will wake up and pray. I'm going back to reading the Bible every day. I'm going to stop wasting so much time on my phone. This time, I'm going to control my desires. But a few days later, you're in the exact same place. And there's something you need to understand before simply concluding that the problem is a lack of faith. Perhaps you still love God deeply. Maybe you really do want to change. But your mind may be being trained every day to desire the exact opposite of what a deep spiritual life requires. Think about it. Much of the world around you offers speed, novelty, and instant reward. You swipe your finger and find another video, another image, another news item, another notification, another stimulus. But prayer requires perseverance. Reading the Word requires attention. Fasting requires renunciation. Resisting temptation requires enduring a desire without immediately obeying it. And perhaps that's precisely where a battle is taking place that many Christians haven't yet realized. Because we're not just talking about cell phones. We're talking about food, shopping, entertainment, pornography, social media, games, validation, fantasies, and anything else your mind has taught you to say, I want to feel good now. And the more accustomed we become to immediately satisfying every impulse, the harder it can become to do what requires waiting, silence, effort, and self-control. This is where dopamine comes in. Not because dopamine is bad, it isn't. But understanding how your brain learns to seek rewards can reveal something surprising about your distractions, your habits, and even some of the temptations you keep facing. So, there is a question we need to answer. Could the way you're training your mind during the day be making it harder to seek God when you finally decide to stop and pray? Because perhaps your greatest spiritual battle doesn't begin when temptation appears. Perhaps she is being prepared long before that. Before continuing, if you've ever opened the Bible determined to seek God, but a few minutes later realized your mind was everywhere, leave a like on this video. This shows me that this is a topic we need to talk about more here. And I want to know if you are also facing this battle. Commente. I need to regain my focus, not as a statement of guilt, but as a decision to acknowledge that your attention needs to return to what truly matters. To understand why this can affect your spiritual life so much, we first need to correct a very common misconception about dopamine. Dopamine is not simply the pleasure substance. She participates in processes related to motivation, learning, and, most importantly, how her brain learns to seek what it expects to be rewarding. Imagine something simple. You are alone at night, and you feel bored. That's the trigger. Your brain reminds you that something is capable of quickly changing what you are feeling. Expectations arise, so you pick up your phone, open a social media app, look for food, start a series, or access pornography. That's the behavior. For a few minutes, you find novelty, distraction, or relief. That's the reward. And when this happens repeatedly, your brain learns an association. Trigger, expectation, behavior, reward, repetition. This is how something seemingly small can begin to take up more and more space in your life. You don't always pick up your phone because you consciously decided to do so. Sometimes your hand will simply reach out to him. You don't always seek out certain content because you genuinely wanted it. Sometimes I was just tired, frustrated, lonely, or bored. And here is the point that many Christians need to understand. What you repeat is training what you are seeking. Shorts, notifications, games, pornography, food, shopping, TV series, news, people's approval. None of this automatically means there's something wrong with you. The danger arises when your mind becomes so accustomed to novelty, speed, and immediate reward. Who begins to lose tolerance for anything that doesn't offer a quick reward? And now think about spiritual life. Prayer does not offer a new notification every 15 seconds. The Bible doesn't change the subject because you got bored. Fasting does not provide immediate rewards. And resisting temptation means experiencing a desire without having to obey it. That is why spiritual maturity requires something that our culture is making increasingly difficult: learning to stay. Stay when it's quiet. To stay when it's not exciting. To stay when you don't feel anything extraordinary. Stay when your body is asking for immediate relief. Perhaps that's why some temptations seem so powerful. The problem may not begin the moment you encounter pornography, feel a sexual urge, or face that old temptation. The battle may have started hours earlier. Every time boredom struck, you immediately sought stimulation. Every time she felt discomfort and needed to escape. Every time an impulse arose, and you reacted without even stopping to realize it. Little by little, you may be teaching yourself an extremely dangerous rule. When I feel something that I don't want to feel, I need to do something immediately to change it. And then comes the temptation. Now, you're not just fighting against that desire. You are fighting against a pattern that may have been practiced hundreds of times in completely different situations. That's why learning to overcome certain temptations requires more than just saying no at the last second. You need to understand what happens before the fall. And that's exactly why I want to show you something that can change the way you see this battle. Because if you only try to resist when the desire is already strong, often people are entering the fight too late. There are triggers, thoughts, and patterns happening before the fall, and learning to recognize them can make all the difference. That's why I prepared the guide. Before You Fall It was created to help you identify what's happening. Before temptation takes control, recognize your triggers and build a practical response for those moments when you feel you are about to relapse. If you're tired of regretting things later and want to start understanding what to do. Before, I highly recommend that you check out this material. The link is in the pinned comment and in the description of this video. Click on it and get your guide. Because maybe you don't need another promise that this time it will be different. Perhaps you need a plan for when temptation strikes. This material has a very profound goal. Remove patterns that have been stealing your attention, your peace, and your intimacy with God, so that you can return to praying with presence, seek the Word with purpose, and build a more consistent spiritual life. Because overcoming a fall is important, but regaining a deep connection with God can transform much more than just a moment of temptation. Now that you understand the mechanism, we need to make it personal. Because you might be thinking, okay, but how do I know if this pattern is actually affecting my spiritual life? There are some signs that can help you notice this, and perhaps some of them are uncomfortably familiar. The first sign is that you almost always need some kind of stimulation. Pay attention to the little moments in your day. You're waiting for something and you pick up your phone. You go to eat and put on a video. You get in the car and immediately turn something on. You lie down on the bed and start scrolling. The silence began to feel strange. This matters because a life with God also has moments when there is no entertainment, novelty, or excitement. There are moments of silence, waiting, and reflection. The second sign is that you are unable to remain focused during prayer. You start praying and, a few seconds later, you remember a message, a task, or something you need to research. This doesn't automatically mean you don't love God. This could mean that your attention is being fragmented for virtually the rest of the day. The third sign is even more revealing. The Bible seems slow, while fast-paced content seems irresistible. You can watch dozens of videos in a row, but 2 pages of Scripture seem to require an enormous effort. Perhaps the problem is not that the Word has lost its value. Perhaps your mind has become accustomed to a completely different rhythm. The fourth sign is that you are losing tolerance for discomfort. And here we enter extremely important spiritual territory, because resisting temptation involves discomfort. You feel the urge, but you don't respond. She feels desire, but she waits. She feels the urge, but chooses not to obey. Self-control doesn't mean never feeling an impulse. It means that the impulse doesn't need to decide what you'll do next. And this brings us to the fifth sign. You know what you should do, but you seek immediate relief when you are vulnerable. Pay special attention when you are tired, lonely, anxious, frustrated, rejected, or simply bored. It is in these moments that old patterns often resurface. You are looking for food. Pick up your cell phone. Open a specific application. Seeking validation. He starts fantasizing. Or you go back to content you promised you'd never access again. And there's something important here. Many sexual declines don't begin with sexual desire. They might start out bored, with loneliness, with stress, with frustration. It was a difficult night, and so a mind that has learned that all discomfort needs to be resolved immediately seeks the quickest reward it knows. Therefore, when you only analyze the moment of the fall, you may be looking at the last chapter and ignoring everything that wrote the story. So, the next time a temptation appears, before you ask yourself, just, why am I wanting this? Try asking, what was I feeling before I started wanting this? This simple question might reveal a pattern you never noticed before, because perhaps the behavior you're trying to eliminate is only the surface of the problem, and God may want to transform something much deeper within you. It's important to make something very clear. The Bible doesn't talk about dopamine. It would be wrong to try to fit a modern neuroscience concept into a text written thousands of years ago. But the Bible speaks repeatedly about something even deeper. What happens when our desires begin to rule us? She talks about mindfulness, self-control, renewal of the mind, perseverance, temptation, and about the battle between what we want now and what we know has far greater value. Romans 12:21 says not to conform to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Understand this, spiritual transformation also involves what is happening in your mind. Galatians 5:5 presents self-control as a fruit of the Spirit. And Paul makes a striking statement in 1 Corinthians 6:12. I will not be dominated by anything. Perhaps this is a question we need to ask ourselves more often. Not only that, is that a sin? But, is this starting to overwhelm me? Can I put my phone down? Can I be alone without needing to immediately escape to some kind of stimulation? Can I feel a desire without needing to satisfy it? Can I remain in God's presence even when I don't feel a strong emotion? Because there is a story in the Bible that powerfully illustrates the danger of immediate reward. Esau came back from the field exhausted and hungry. Jacob was preparing food. At that moment, Esau possessed something extremely valuable: his birthright. But there was a problem. He wanted something now. Hunger was a reality. The food was right in front of him. Primogeniture was something much greater. But its value did not offer the same satisfaction at that moment. And Esau made a devastating trade. He gave up something of great future value to satisfy a present desire. Now think about how many times we make smaller versions of that same exchange. We want intimacy with God, but we want 5 more minutes of encouragement now. We want freedom from sin, but we want relief now. We want a clear mind, but we want that image now. We want discipline, but we want comfort now. We want to become a certain kind of person tomorrow. But today, we continue to nurture the desires of the person we are trying to leave behind. And perhaps one of the most important questions in this video is this: how often are we trading what we deeply desire for what we want immediately? That is why Jesus says in Matthew 26:41, "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." Observe the order. Vigilance comes before entering into temptation. Perhaps spiritual maturity isn't just about learning to fight when desire has already taken hold of you. Perhaps it's about learning to recognize what is slowly taking over your attention, your habits, and your heart before that moment arrives. Because freedom is not about living without desires. Freedom is not needing to be governed by all of them. So, what can you do with all of this? Because recognizing the problem without changing the environment that fuels it will likely cause you to repeat the same cycle. And the solution isn't to declare war on dopamine, abandon all technology, or live without pleasure. The goal is much more practical. You need to relearn how to choose where you place your attention, instead of allowing every impulse to choose for you. Start with something simple. First, stop trying to fill every empty moment. Next time you're waiting for something, don't immediately pick up your cell phone. When walking for a few minutes, try not putting on any videos. When you finish a task, don't automatically seek another dose of stimulation. Allow yourself to experience a few minutes of silence. It may seem insignificant, but you are practicing something important: feeling an impulse without having to obey it. Second, protect the first few minutes of your day. If the first thing your mind receives upon waking is notifications, videos, news, and messages, you begin your day reacting to what other people have put in front of you. Try reversing that order. Before giving your attention to the world, give it to God, even if it's only 10 minutes initially. Ori. Read the Word. Be quiet. Don't try to feel something extraordinary. Just remain. Third, create space between the impulse and the response. When the urge arises to pick up your phone, eat even when you're not hungry, open a particular website, or search for sexual content, don't immediately try to fight the desire. It seems. Breathe. Ask, what am I feeling right now? Boredom? Loneliness? Anxiety? Frustration? Tiredness? Sometimes identifying the true trigger completely changes the battle. Fourth, practice spiritual perseverance. If you can't concentrate on prayer for 30 minutes today, don't let that be a reason to give up. Start with 10, but be truly present during those 10. Then increase it. Spiritual depth isn't built solely in moments when you feel the urge to seek God. It is also built when you remain when you don't feel anything. And there is one last practice that I consider especially important. Learn to voluntarily endure minor discomforts. Not every desire needs to be fulfilled. Not all boredom needs to disappear. Not every desire needs to turn into action. It is precisely in this space between "I want to" and "I will do it" that self-control begins to grow. And perhaps you'll realize something surprising. The less each impulse controls your attention, the more space you begin to find for things you previously said you didn't have time for. Prayer, reflection, word, silence, presence. Perhaps you don't need to add God to a life that's already completely full of stimuli. You may need to remove some noise to be able to hear Him again. In the end, perhaps the biggest lesson from all of this is realizing that this battle was never just about the cell phone. It's not just about pornography either. It's not just about social media, food, entertainment, or any other specific behavior. It's about what you're training your desires for every day. Because what you repeat starts to gain strength. Every time you feel bored and immediately seek stimulation, a pattern is being reinforced. Every time you feel anxious and need to escape, a pattern is being reinforced. Every time a temptation arises and you respond automatically, a pattern is being reinforced. But there is an important truth. The opposite path can also be trained. Every time you feel an urge and decide to wait, every time he closes his cell phone and remains in prayer, every time you choose to open the Word, even when you don't feel like it. Each time you identify a trigger before it turns into a relapse, you are practicing a different way of responding. And perhaps that's why this battle is much bigger than simply asking, "How can I stop doing this?" Perhaps the most profound question is, what kind of person am I becoming through what I do repeatedly? Because God isn't only interested in that moment, when you manage to say no to a temptation. He wants to transform your mind, your desires, your choices, and your heart. So, start asking different questions. Instead of just asking, "Is this a sin?" Ask, "Is this overwhelming me? Is this strengthening or weakening my self-control? Is this robbing me of my ability to stand before God? Is this bringing my heart closer to what truly matters?" Perhaps some things in your life don't need to be eliminated completely, but perhaps they need to relinquish the control they have quietly gained. Because there's a huge difference between enjoying something and needing it to escape everything you don't want to feel. And I want to leave you with one last question. Imagine the person you could become if, over the next few months, your attention were once again focused on yourself. Imagine being able to stay silent without anxiety. Open the Bible without feeling the need to check your cell phone. Pray without constantly seeking something else. To feel a temptation without believing that you need to obey it. And above all, imagine returning to seek God not only in moments of guilt after a fall, but building a life where you learn to stay close to Him before the battle even begins. This topic is much more profound than we can explore in a single video. And if you really want to delve deeper, better understand the patterns that occur before your falls, and finally put an end to a lukewarm spiritual life, grab the Before You Fall guide from the link in the description and the pinned comment. But I want to be clear. This material is not for those who are just looking for something else to read and then forget about. It is for those who wish to build a deeper life with God. For those who are tired of the cycle of temptation, fall, guilt, promise, and another fall. For those who don't want to simply feel remorse after sinning, but want to learn to recognize the battle before falling. If this is the life you want to build, the guide is waiting for you at the link. If this video helped you see your struggle in a different light, please like and subscribe to the channel, because we will continue to bring you content that combines biblical principles with practical tools to strengthen your walk with God. And before you leave, I want you to answer one question in the comments. What is the thing that has been stealing your attention away from God the most lately? It could be your cell phone, social media, pornography, anxiety, entertainment, work, or anything else. Recognizing what is consuming your attention can be the first step in ceasing to be ruled by it. You don't need to wait for the next fall to start changing. The battle begins long before, and your transformation can begin too.